Yeah, no, I love my life now. Absolutely love it. Coming back to Sedona, I was a mess.
The silence in the room was deafening as Christine slowly reached for the paperwork. Her hands didn't shake from nerves, they trembled with pure, unfiltered rage that had been building for months. When she finally held up that hospital bill, the number at the bottom made everyone in the room gasp. $450,000. Not a typo, not a billing error, not a decimal point in the wrong place. Nearly $500,000 in medical expenses for her daughter's emergency surgery. And the man who should have been standing beside her through this nightmare had simply walked away. This isn't just another story about reality TV family drama or arguments over money. This is about a father who allegedly abandoned his child during the most terrifying moments of her young life, leaving Christine to shoulder a debt that could have destroyed her financially. But here's where this story takes a shocking turn. Because Christine has evidence that suggests Cody not only had the money to help, but actively chose not to use it. The hospital bill wasn't just a piece of paper, it was Christine's breaking point for years. She had watched resources flow freely to certain households while others struggled to make ends meet. She had witnessed unequal treatment disguised as complicated family dynamics. She had swallowed her pride, made excuses, and tried to keep the peace. But when her daughter's life hung in the balance and that astronomical bill landed on her kitchen table, something inside Christine finally snapped. Family insiders describe a chilling confrontation when Christine showed Cody the total amount. There was no screaming, no dramatic scene, just cold, hard numbers laid bare between them. His response, according to multiple sources, wasn't concern for his daughter or offers to help find a solution. Instead, he reportedly took one look at that figure and simply turned away, leaving Christine to face the financial avalanche completely alone. But this betrayal runs deeper than one refused payment. What Christine discovered while digging through old family documents suggests this abandonment was years in the making, and the medical crisis just revealed how little she and her children actually mattered when it came to Cody's priorities. The evidence she's gathered could change everything we thought we knew about this family.
I don't know if I'm even making sense.
No, it makes sense because I remember that therapy session in Sedona where you got...
The disrespect hadn't happened overnight. It had been building like pressure in a dam, with small cracks appearing everywhere until the whole structure was ready to collapse. Christine had endured years of being dismissed as a mother, overlooked as a wife, and treated as less than equal among the sister wives. But she never imagined that disrespect would extend to abandoning a child in medical crisis. When that hospital bill arrived, Christine went into crisis mode. She contacted insurance companies, filled out financial aid applications, and even reached out to network representatives to see if emergency medical expenses could somehow be covered under their filming agreements. She explored every possible avenue, exhausted every option, and still the bills kept mounting. Every day brought new charges, late fees, and increasingly urgent demands for payment from medical billing departments. The most natural thing in the world would have been to reach out to Cody for help, not as a favor between ex-partners, not as charity, but as a father's basic responsibility to his child. What Christine received instead was a masterclass in deflection, blame shifting, and emotional abandonment that would have been shocking if it hadn't fit such a clear pattern of behavior. First, Cody said he needed time to think about it. Then he questioned whether the bills were even accurate, suggesting that someone in the family must have misunderstood the insurance paperwork. He floated theories about billing errors and inflated charges, anything to avoid taking responsibility for what was clearly a legitimate medical emergency that had cost his daughter dearly. But here's what makes this betrayal even more devastating. While Christine was desperately trying to figure out how to pay for her daughter's life-saving care, she stumbled across evidence of a family emergency fund that Cody had allegedly established years earlier, a fund specifically designed for exactly this type of crisis, with clear documentation stating that all children would be covered equally regardless of which mother they belonged to. The question that haunts Christine now is simple but profound. If this emergency fund existed, if it was specifically created for situations like her daughter's medical crisis, then where did the money go? And why did Cody pretend it had never existed when she needed it most? The answers to those questions could expose a level of financial deception that goes far beyond anything the public has seen before.
Why? What does that mean?
Like I was, sorry, it's funniest word.
Returning to Sedona felt like revisiting a crime scene. Christine had hoped never to go back to that place where she first truly understood how little she mattered in Cody's world. The therapy sessions, the painful confrontations, the slow, crushing realization that she was fighting for a relationship that had already ended in his mind. It all came flooding back with devastating clarity, but this time was different. This wasn't about hurt feelings or relationship dynamics, or the complex emotional landscape of plural marriage. This was about her daughter's life and a father who couldn't be bothered to show up. When it mattered most, the betrayal cut deeper than any marital counseling session ever could, because it proved that even his children weren't immune to his selective care and attention. Christine had always been the family's organizer, the detail keeper, the one who remembered important dates and tracked shared expenses. Those same skills that had kept their complicated household running were now about to become Cody's worst nightmare. Because while he was busy pretending the emergency fund never existed, Christine was methodically building a paper trail that proved it did. The timeline she constructed was damning in its precision. Emergency fund established during better times, check. Family agreement signed by all parties with clear provisions for medical emergencies, check. Mysterious disappearance of funds just weeks before her daughter's crisis, check. And most damning of all, recorded conversations where Cody admitted to moving money around without informing the other wives. Christine realized she had been unconsciously building a legal case for years, simply by being the organized, detail-oriented person she had always been. Every email, every text message, every family meeting note had been carefully preserved. Now all of that documentation was about to serve a purpose she never could have imagined. When she first started keeping those records, the moment she held up that hospital bill to the camera crew wasn't about shock value or creating drama for television. It was about sending a clear message that she was done protecting someone who had never protected her. The loyal, understanding Christine, who had always given Cody the benefit of the doubt, was gone, replaced by a woman who had finally seen the truth about where she really stood in his priorities. The pressure to focus on her real estate business while dealing with crushing medical debt created an impossible situation for Christine. How do you build a future when you're drowning in bills from someone else's refusal to take responsibility? Every moment spent working was shadowed by the knowledge that hundreds of thousands of dollars in medical expenses were hanging over her head like a sword. What made the situation even more unbearable was watching other family members live without such concerns. While Christine worried about putting food on the table and making mortgage payments, other households seemed insulated from financial stress. The contrast wasn't lost on her, and it certainly wasn't lost on her children, who were watching how differently their family was being treated. The night of the medical emergency will haunt Christine forever. Racing through the darkness to get her daughter to the hospital, calling every emergency contact she had, praying that they would make it in time. The hospital was over 30 minutes away, and in those 30 minutes, Christine's world changed completely. She went from being part of a large, supposedly supportive family to being utterly alone with a critically ill child. When they arrived at the emergency room, nurses immediately recognized the severity of the situation and rushed her daughter into treatment. What followed was a blur of medical professionals, beeping machines, and forms that Christine signed without reading because her only concern was making sure her child received the care she needed. The thought that she would later be abandoned financially never even crossed her mind. Christine made 2 phone calls that night, one to a close friend who immediately offered to come to the hospital for support, the other, reluctantly, to Cody, to inform him that his daughter was in critical condition. She didn't expect him to drop everything and rush to the hospital, but she did expect basic concern and support from the father of her child. What she got instead was a sleepy, disinterested voice asking if this was really something he needed to be involved in. That single question revealed everything Christine needed to know about where she and her children stood in Cody's priorities. It wasn't the response of a concerned father. It was the response of someone who viewed his child's medical emergency as an inconvenience. He never showed up at the hospital. He didn't call the next morning to check on his daughter's condition. When Christine sent him a photo of their child in a hospital bed with info in her arm, his only response was a thumbs-up emoji, no words of comfort, no expression of concern. Just a casual acknowledgement that meant less than nothing in that moment of crisis. Hospital staff later told Christine that bringing her daughter in when she did probably saved her life. 1 more hour of delay could have resulted in catastrophic complications. Her daughter underwent emergency surgery that same day, with Christine never leaving her bedside, never letting go of her hand, and constantly checking her phone hoping for some sign that Cody cared about what was happening. The lack of respect Christine had endured over the years suddenly crystallized into perfect clarity. During her daughter's medical crisis, she hadn't been respected as a mother, as a wife, or as an individual human being deserving of basic consideration. But somehow she had convinced herself that when it really mattered, when their children needed help, Cody would step up and do the right thing when the itemized hospital bill arrived weeks later. Christine sat at her kitchen table in stunned silence as she flipped through page after page of charges. The grand total of $450,000 looked like a mortgage payment, not a medical bill. This wasn't elective surgery or cosmetic procedures, this was emergency, life-saving care that had prevented her daughter from suffering permanent damage or worse. At first, Christine assumed there had been some kind of billing error. She had always been meticulous about insurance coverage, and the family had maintained policies during their time together. Maybe the coverage wasn't comprehensive, but it should have been enough to prevent this kind of financial disaster. When she called the billing office, however, she discovered that the insurance had lapsed months earlier. The policy that Cody was supposedly responsible for maintaining had never been renewed. Christine didn't have access to the account, didn't know the passwords, didn't even know it had expired. While she was trusting that basic protections were in place for her children, Cody had allowed their coverage to quietly disappear. Without telling anyone, the itemization of charges was staggering. In its detail, $38,000 for emergency surgery, $74,000 for 3 nights in intensive care, $8,000 for the surgeon's separate consultation fee, physical therapy, follow-up appointments, specialized imaging, prescription medications. It all added up with mathematical precision that left no room for argument or negotiation. One line item that particularly struck Christine: charged $200 for a single box of hospital-grade tissues. She actually laughed when she saw that entry, laughed until the absurdity of it all made her cry. How had keeping her daughter alive become a financial burden so enormous that even tissues cost more than most people spend on groceries in a week? As she sat with those pages spread across her table, a memory surfaced from years earlier. During one of their family budgeting meetings, Cody had specifically mentioned creating a reserve account for emergencies, not everyday expenses or minor inconveniences, but real emergencies like medical crises and unexpected disasters. It was one of the few times Christine remembered him seeming genuinely responsible about family finances. But when she had asked about that fund after their separation, Cody had brushed off her questions like the account had never existed. He claimed she must have misremembered that family money had always been tight, that there had never been any significant reserves set aside for emergencies. Christine knew she wasn't the type to forget something that important, which meant someone was lying. Digging through old files from their Flagstaff home, Christine found a dusty folder labeled Household Reserve that she hadn't looked at in years. Inside were handwritten notes, typed documents, and signed agreements outlining family contributions, contingency plans, and specific provisions for emergency medical expenses. The signatures were all there, including Cody's, and the language clearly stated that all children would be covered equally. The business expo that was supposed to determine their future profitability seemed almost trivial compared to the magnitude of medical debt Christine was facing. While they worried about selling 100 pieces to justify a weekend investment, she was dealing with bills that could have purchased several businesses outright. The disconnect between their minor entrepreneurial concerns and her major financial crisis was stark and painful. When Christine finally reached out to Cody about the hospital bills, she kept her initial message short and non-confrontational. She simply informed him that their daughter was recovering well and asked if they could discuss how to handle the financial aspects of her care. She didn't demand anything, didn't make accusations, just opened the door for what should have been a straightforward conversation between two parents. Cody's response came 2 hours later, acknowledging that the amount was significant and saying he would need time to think about it. Christine waited patiently, understanding that such a large sum would require consideration and planning. But 1 day passed, then 2, then 5, with no follow-up communication about how they would address their daughter's medical expenses. When Christine gently nudged him for an update, Cody replied with a longer message that completely changed the tone of their conversation. According to family sources who claimed to have seen the exchange, he mentioned speaking with a financial advisor and cited complications due to an ongoing legal situation. He used the phrase, "My liabilities are all tied up," as if his daughter's medical care was just another business expense to be managed. Christine was stunned by how quickly he had shifted from the role of concerned father to unavailable financial consultant. What legal situation was he referring to? She hadn't heard anything about active court cases or legal complications that would prevent him from helping his own child. How could he treat his daughter's emergency surgery like a disputed invoice that required legal review? The worst part came 2 weeks later when Christine followed up again. The bill had progressed from estimate to final notice, and collection agencies were beginning to make contact. She asked if Cody could contribute anything, even a partial payment, to help ease the mounting pressure. His response was devastating in its brevity and coldness, according to multiple insiders. Cody's reply contained just 3 words with no greeting or explanation: "Not my liability." Those words have reportedly haunted Christine ever since, representing not just a refusal to help financially, but a complete rejection of his responsibility as a father. Their daughter's medical crisis had been reduced to a liability issue that he simply didn't want to deal with. But the cruelest twist came when Christine learned about money that Cody had found for other priorities during this same period. Sources close to another sister wife revealed that he had recently transferred nearly $15,000 to help cover private school tuition for one of Robin's children. The timing was less than a week after he had told Christine that his finances were too complicated to help with medical bills. The pressure to generate income while managing crushing debt created an impossible balancing act for Christine. She had to focus on building financial stability for the future, while dealing with immediate threats to her economic survival. Every moment spent on long-term business development was time away from addressing the urgent crisis that medical billing departments weren't going to wait for her to resolve. The selective responsibility that Cody showed toward different family members became impossible to ignore when it came to Robin and her children. There always seemed to be solutions, resources, and financial flexibility. When it came to Christine and her daughters, there were only excuses, delays, and claims of complicated circumstances that prevented any meaningful support. This pattern of unequal treatment wasn't new, but the medical emergency made it impossible to rationalize or excuse anymore. Christine realized she had been making allowances for behavior that was fundamentally unfair and potentially damaging to her children's well-being. The illusion of family unity had been shattered by the reality of selective care and deliberate neglect. That's when Christine made a decision that would change everything. She stopped hoping for fairness and started planning for independence. Instead of waiting for Cody to do the right thing, she began building a case that would protect her interests and ensure her children's needs were met, regardless of his cooperation or lack thereof. The quiet transformation in Christine's approach was noted by people close to the situation. She didn't announce her intentions or make dramatic declarations about taking legal action. Instead, she simply began documenting everything with the methodical precision of someone who knew that evidence would eventually be needed to establish the truth. According to someone in her inner circle, Christine made an appointment with an attorney during this period. It wasn't about revenge or creating public drama. It was about protection for herself and her daughters. After years of financial uncertainty while watching resources flow freely elsewhere in the family, Christine recognized she needed legal advice about her options. The attorney reportedly asked her to compile a comprehensive record of family financial arrangements, communications, and any documentation that could establish patterns of behavior or broken agreements. Christine, with her detail-oriented nature, was well prepared for this request. She had folders full of shared expense logs, group text printouts, and even screenshots of family financial protocols that she had saved from better times. But there was one piece of evidence that Christine hadn't told anyone about, something that could potentially change the entire dynamic of any legal proceedings. She had a voicemail recording from a conversation with Cody weeks before their final separation. And buried in that audio was an admission that the emergency fund had been repurposed without informing all the wives involved. The business weekend that was supposed to decide their entrepreneurial future felt like a cruel joke when compared to the magnitude of what Christine was facing personally. While they worried about whether their venture would become profitable enough to support the family, she was dealing with medical debt that dwarfed any potential business income they might generate. Christine found herself replaying the voicemail recording over and over, not because she needed to hear Cody's words again, but because she couldn't believe she had initially let such a significant admission pass without confrontation. The conversation had been long and meandering, full of his typical deflections and circular logic. But buried in the middle was that one crucial line about repurposing family emergency funds. The implications of that single word, repurposed, were staggering. It suggested that money specifically designated for family emergencies had been moved or used for other purposes without the knowledge or consent of all parties involved. If this was true, it would explain why Christine had been left to handle her daughter's medical crisis alone while believing that emergency resources should have been available. According to rumors, Christine saved the voicemail to a secure drive and shared it with her attorney for review. Some insiders claimed she also played portions of it for one of the show's producers. who reportedly reacted with shock not just at what Cody had said, but at the potential legal implications of his admission. For the first time in years, Christine had something resembling leverage in her dealings with Cody. But this wasn't about gaining advantage for its own sake. Christine's focus remained on protecting her daughters and ensuring they wouldn't be abandoned again during future crises. When a child goes through a medical emergency and one parent's instinct is to avoid responsibility rather than provide care, it represents a fundamental failure that goes beyond financial obligations. The voicemail gave Christine something she had been lacking throughout her relationship with Cody, proof that her concerns and memories were valid. She hadn't been imagining the promises about emergency funds or misremembering family financial agreements. The evidence was there in his own words, recorded during a moment when he thought no one would ever hold him accountable for what he had admitted. Inside the Brown family, the children were watching everything unfold with increasing awareness of how their father treated different family members. The daughter who had undergone emergency surgery was particularly affected by Cody's absence during her recovery period. Behind the occasional family photos and public appearances, there was a heaviness that those close to the family say has never fully lifted. The emotional impact on Christine's daughter wasn't just about her father's physical absence during the most frightening days of her life. It was about the complete lack of follow-up support, the absence of check-in calls, and the total silence from someone who should have been expressing concern and offering comfort during her recovery process. The hope that they would sell every piece of inventory felt desperate rather than optimistic, because Christine knew that even complete success in their business venture wouldn't be enough to address the medical debt she was facing. The numbers simply didn't add up, and she was running out of time to find solutions before collection agencies escalated their efforts to recover the money. The emotional toll on Christine's daughter became most apparent about a week after the surgery, when she was still groggy from medication, but aware enough to notice her father's continued absence. According to family friends, she asked her mother a question that broke Christine's heart. "Does Dad not care that I almost died?" Christine reportedly had no answer that could adequately explain Cody's behavior. Around this time, one of Christine's older children allegedly began drafting a crowdfunding page as a contingency plan in case the medical bills became completely unmanageable. The page was never published, but several people close to the family confirmed that it existed as a backup option. The mere idea that her children were considering such measures shook Christine to her core. Her kids shouldn't have needed to worry about crowdfunding their sister's medical expenses, not when their father could afford new furniture, expensive boots, and travel between multiple households. The stark contrast between his spending on personal preferences and his refusal to help with genuine family emergencies was impossible for the older children to ignore or excuse. The emotional ripple effects extended throughout the family as other siblings began asking uncomfortable questions about why some households never seemed to experience financial stress, while others struggled with basic necessities. The unequal treatment that adults had learned to rationalize was much harder for children to accept when it directly affected their sister's health and recovery. When the holidays arrived, family gatherings became tense affairs where the unspoken tensions finally surfaced. According to multiple insiders, one of Christine's daughters asked Cody directly, in front of other family members, whether he planned to reimburse Christine for any of the hospital expenses. His visible discomfort and attempt to shut down the conversation by claiming that money matters shouldn't be discussed at dinner only made the situation worse. The inadequacy of his response was noted by everyone present, including extended family members who had previously tried to stay neutral in family disputes. Some guests reportedly left early, while others remained but barely participated in conversations for the rest of the evening. The facade of family harmony had been shattered by a simple question that demanded a basic level of accountability. From that point forward, Christine's children stopped trying to maintain relationships that clearly weren't reciprocal. The warmth and connection that had occasionally existed between them and their father began to fade as they processed his response to their sister's medical crisis. What had started as a health emergency had become a generational divide that might never be fully repaired. But while the family fractured internally, Christine began receiving unexpected support from outside sources. Word of her situation had spread through various communities, and people who had observed the family dynamics over the years were quietly offering assistance and expressing sympathy for what she was going through alone. The reality of their financial situation had become impossible to ignore or rationalize. Christine could see clearly that the multiple income streams they had discussed as a family for years were not designed to benefit everyone equally. while she struggled to generate enough income to cover basic household expenses. Other family members seemed to operate with different financial constraints and opportunities. Community support for Christine began building in ways that surprised even her closest friends. Women in their local faith community started comparing notes about Kody's behavior and expressing concerns about how Christine had been left to handle the medical crisis alone. The pattern of his presence at events involving Robin's children and his absence from gatherings focused on other family members had not gone unnoticed. Local residents who had initially been supportive of the family's presence in Flagstaff began expressing doubts about Kody's character after learning about his response to his daughter's medical emergency. Even people who had given him the benefit of the doubt in previous controversies found his behavior during this crisis impossible to defend or excuse. That's when Christine received an unexpected phone call that would change her perspective on how alone she really was in this struggle. According to multiple sources, someone reached out on behalf of a former crew member who had worked on their show for several years. This person had heard about Christine's situation and wanted to help, not publicly or dramatically, but quietly and meaningfully. Christine initially didn't believe the offer was genuine, but it proved to be very real. A significant portion of the hospital bill, reportedly around $75,000, may have been covered by this private donor. The timing aligned perfectly with Christine's consideration of selling part of her Arizona property just to stay ahead of debt collectors, a sale that ultimately never needed to happen. Around the same time, producers at the network allegedly became aware of Christine's financial crisis and the potential impact it could have on filming schedules and family dynamics. According to anonymous sources involved in production, there were discussions about providing assistance to prevent the situation from spiraling into legal action that could disrupt the show's continuity. Whether or not the network ultimately provided direct financial support remains unclear. But what became obvious was that Christine no longer needed to rely on Kody for help. Other people, including individuals outside the immediate family circle, had stepped up to provide the support he had refused to offer his own daughter. This external assistance confirmed what Christine had feared all along. She wasn't just unsupported by Kody. She was intentionally being left to fail while he focused his resources and attention elsewhere. The contrast between his abandonment and others' willingness to help highlighted the moral bankruptcy of his position as a father and former partner. Christine's belief that their business venture could be profitable was tempered by her realistic assessment that it would never generate enough income to support multiple people fairly. This pragmatic view reflected her growing understanding that family enterprises, like family relationships, seemed to benefit some members more than others regardless of who contributed the most effort. The realization that she could no longer count on equitable treatment within family structures, whether personal or professional, marked a turning point in Christine's approach to protecting herself and her children. She was done being the peacemaker who absorbed unfair treatment in the name of maintaining harmony that only seemed to benefit one person behind the scenes. Christine had been working methodically with legal counsel to build a comprehensive case, documenting years of financial inequality and broken promises. Whether this would result in formal legal action against Kody personally or focus on recovering assets from shared family resources remained unclear. But the foundation for either approach was being carefully constructed. The evidence Christine had assembled over time painted a damning picture of systematic financial neglect, disguised as complicated family dynamics. Years of emails, text messages, banking records, and joint account documentation showed a clear pattern of promises made and broken, resources allocated unequally, and obligations abandoned when they became inconvenient. At the center of her legal strategy was the voicemail recording where Kody had admitted to repurposing emergency funds without proper notification or consent. That single word, repurposed, could carry significant legal weight if it demonstrated misuse of communal resources or deliberate misrepresentation of family financial arrangements. To other parties involved, even more compelling was the possibility that Christine had additional recordings showing Kody contradicting his own previous statements about family financial resources. If he had claimed on one occasion that emergency funds existed and were available, then later denied their existence entirely, this contradiction could suggest a pattern of willful deception designed to avoid financial responsibility. Legal experts familiar with reality TV family situations acknowledge that these cases are complex, particularly when formal marriage contracts don't exist. However, documented agreements, established patterns of behavior, and recorded statements about shared resources can still carry legal weight, especially when children's welfare is involved. Christine's meticulous record-keeping of post-separation expenses, from grocery bills to therapy sessions to medical co-pays, demonstrated just how uneven the financial support had become. She had maintained these records not out of spite, but out of necessity, knowing that someday she might need to prove how completely she had been abandoned. To handle family responsibilities alone, the question now wasn't whether Christine had grounds for legal action, but what form that action would take and when she would choose to move forward with it. Some observers believe she's preparing a civil claim for financial damages, while others suggest she's building leverage for formal mediation that could resolve matters. Without public court proceedings, what's certain is that Christine is no longer giving Cody the benefit of the doubt or accepting his excuses for unequal treatment. She has moved beyond hoping for fairness to demanding accountability, and the evidence she has compiled could finally force the kind of reckoning that years of private conversations never achieved. Cody had always relied on his ability to charm his way out of difficult situations, using his public persona and carefully crafted explanations to deflect criticism and maintain his image. But Christine's quiet documentation and methodical approach to building her case had created a situation where charm and deflection might no longer be sufficient. To avoid consequences, the moment word began spreading about the hospital bill, the voicemail recordings, and Cody's alleged refusal to help his own daughter, something fundamental shifted in public perception. Former supporters began questioning not just this specific situation, but his overall credibility as a father and family leader, who claimed to treat all his children equally. Social media responses were swift and unforgiving. People who had followed the family for years started revisiting old episodes with new perspectives, analyzing Cody's behavior and statements through the lens of what they now understood about his actual priorities and financial decisions. The comments ranged from disappointment to outrage, but they were united in their disbelief that a father could abandon his child during a medical emergency. Behind the scenes, the reputational damage was translating into real consequences for Cody's business prospects and public image. Potential partnerships were quietly canceled, speaking opportunities disappeared, and even network executives were reportedly reconsidering his role in future programming decisions. According to industry insiders, Cody had attempted to hire a public relations firm to help manage the crisis and redirect the narrative toward more favorable territory. However, the PR company allegedly declined to take him on as a client, recognizing that his position was essentially indefensible from a public opinion standpoint. Christine, meanwhile, had maintained her dignity throughout the public backlash, while privately preparing for what many believe will be a definitive moment of truth. According to production sources, she has already filmed a detailed interview where she methodically presents her evidence and tells her side of the story without emotional manipulation or dramatic flair. The interview allegedly includes Christine holding up the actual hospital bill, reading the total amount aloud, and then systematically presenting the documentation she believes proves Cody not only refused to help but actively withheld information about available resources that could have changed everything. If this footage ever makes it to air, it could represent a seismic shift in how the entire family dynamic is understood by the public. Christine would no longer be seen as simply another disgruntled ex-wife, but as a mother who was systematically abandoned by someone who claimed to put family first. While his actions proved the opposite. The question now isn't whether Cody will respond to Christine's revelations, but whether any response he could offer would be adequate to address the evidence she has compiled. When a mother steps forward with documentation, recordings, and a timeline that tells a clear story of abandonment and financial betrayal, the court of public opinion rarely waits for rebuttals or explanations. Christine has moved from hoping for fairness to demanding accountability, and she now holds the power to control how this story is told. After years of staying quiet while others shaped the narrative, she finally has both the evidence and the platform to present the truth as she experienced it, regardless of how uncomfortable that truth might be for others involved.